Alright, today we're going to learn about the Protestant Reformation. When you think of the Protestant Reformation, you probably think of this guy, Henry VIII, or this guy, Martin Luther. But the Protestant Reformation was more than these two men. It also included John Knox, for example, Zwingli in Sweden, and Calvin in France. But more than that, the Protestant Reformation was also about a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is when our ideas radically change, or our worldview changes. For example, during the Protestant Reformation, we saw a change from the idea of authority coming from God through the church into the state. During the Protestant Reformation, we see it change from go to the state having the primary secular authority to religion becoming private. Another paradigm shift you're more familiar with is this one. This is the paradigm shift that came as a result of the scientific revolution that was basically made possible by the free thinking of the Protestant Reformation. Before the scientific revolution, God is the source of truth. After the scientific revolution, science becomes the source of truth rather than God. Now, Miss Gavin.
Who is Miss Gavin?
Miss Gavin is a teacher I totally admire and have a lot of respect for. She already taught you about the Reformation under Henry VIII in England. I'm going to talk more about the Reformation under Martin Luther in Europe.
Ouch!
So Martin Luther was a friar. But he wasn't this type of friar. Nope, he was this type of friar. He was an Augustinian monk. And Martin Luther was very concerned with the church called indulgences. The church would sell indulgences as a way to help people escape purgatory and hell. So Martin Luther was concerned about this practice, so he nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. This was basically like an old school version of a Facebook post. What Martin Luther didn't anticipate was changing more than just the practice of indulgences. Martin Luther will change a lot of Christian theology. For example, one of the big changes will be the idea of where divine revelation comes from.
I'm going to say something funny to the one part.
According to the Catholic Church, divine revelation comes from two sources. We call this the deposit of faith, Scripture and tradition. Martin Luther saw Scripture as the sole source of divine revelation. We call this sola scriptura. Another change Luther will make is the idea of how we're justified before God or made right before God. Before, in the Catholic Church, we believe that faith is lived through works. Martin Luther will argue that sola fide and sola gratia, we're saved by our faith and grace alone. There are asterisks on these points because since the Protestant Reformation, both Catholics and Protestants have come together on this point. We have agreed that it isn't one or the other that saves us. Rather, we both agree that we are saved by grace and faith alone, but that salvation is basically lived through our works. And both Catholics and Protestants now agree upon this point. However, there may still be a difference in emphasis. Now, Martin Luther had to answer for his opposition to church teaching, and he would have to answer to that as a diet of worms. It's not this kind of diet, rather this kind of diet. It's basically a meeting. And it's not these kind of worms, it's this kind of worms. It's worms in Germany. And it basically went down a little bit like this.
Now this is a story all about how a little German monk turned the church upside down in medieval Germany, born and raised. Praying in the church is how he spent most of his days. Reading and writing is what he thought was cool, and teaching at the university school. When a couple of clergy who were up to no good started selling indulgences in Luther's neighborhood, 95 little statements in the church got scared. Pope Leo could tell there was change in the air. Luther begged and he pleaded, "Don't be this way, just listen to what I have to say." But Leo and Charles would have none of this. They gave Luther the order to desist. Standing before Germany's most powerful men, Luther summoned his courage and his will would not bend. "Here I stand," was his cry. "Do what you will, I cannot lie." Excommunicated, a price on his head, wars would follow, many peasants would be dead. But Luther's impact lasts to this day. He helps us see faith in a whole new way. The Church of Christ is broken apart, but we still have not lost all heart. Together, both Catholics and Protestants pray that our churches will be united again one day.
You just learned about how Martin Luther brought about the Reformation in Europe. But he wasn't the only Reformation reformer. There were a lot of other people who changed the way we view religion. For example, there was Ulrich Zwingli in Switzerland. And he began the Anabaptist movement, which emphasized that only adults should be considered for baptism. And from this Anabaptist movement, we get the Mennonites and Amish churches. Now, in France, we have John Calvin. And John Calvin was a great theologian from the Reformed Church. You may know this church as the Presbyterian Church. John Calvin was a great theologian, and from the Presbyterian Church, we get a lot of our churches today, and many would consider the non-denominational fundamentalist churches that we're familiar with, like Calvary Chapel, being descendant from John Calvin's Presbyterian churches. Next, we have a disciple of Calvin in Scotland, and his name was John Knox. John Knox was a disciple of Calvin, and he basically brought the Presbyterian Church to Scotland. And of course, you know this guy, King Henry VIII, who brought the Reformation to England. King Henry challenged the church's authority in Britain and founded the Church of England, which is known as the Anglican Church or the Episcopalian Church in the United States. The church responded to the Protestant Reformation with the Counter-Reformation. When we think of the Counter-Reformation, we usually think of this, which is the Council of Trent. Many look upon the Council of Trent today and think it didn't do enough to reform the church. But as Father Barron has said, the Counter-Reformation really did do a lot to reform the church. When we think of ecumenism today, we think of the idea of striving for unity between the churches. We think of the idea that we are founded on our love for Jesus Christ, even though the church is founded on St. Peter, with wonderful people like Pope Francis. We want to bring unity to the Christian church. Ecumenism is about Christians being united. It's about Christians coming together and acknowledging our uniqueness. So we're able to acknowledge that we're unique, but we're able to cherish that which brings us together. At the end of the day, ecumenism is all about recognizing that we're one Christian family, Protestant and Catholic, united together in our love for Jesus Christ. you.